Hey, y'all, and welcome to our 28th episode of Three Pagans on Tap. Before we get started, we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement, courtesy of our guest this time, Cabra. So if y'all would get us started.
All right. So here, both Maleck and I live on Anishinaabe and Potawatomi land, and I want to offer up a prayer both to the spirits of these who are dead, who call this place home, and also to the spirits of the land themselves. Hail to the dead beneath our feet, and hail to the Lan Vatir that claim them. We thank you. We offer our acknowledgement. We offer our open heart. Later we will offer tobacco on you, O sacred land. Hail to you, holy ones who sustain us, and those who live beneath our feet. You are not forgotten. You are remembered. Wow.
I offer up a breath in remembrance of the history of the valley in which I live, that before invasion by the British, this land was home to the Seneca and the Wazaze peoples, and that even long after the invasion by the British, this land continued to have indigenous presence on it, with the Pueblo peoples who helped build our skyscrapers, and the continued presence of Haudenosaunee peoples in the city to this day. I offer up a breath so that you may have the strength and resources you need to continue your ways and your existence in this valley, in hopes that one day, wrongs can be righted and I can come into a right relationship with the land on which I live. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
All right, now that I'm crying, so Cabra requested that we start the evening off with a prayer to a Thelemic goddess named Babylon. So, without further ado, give me just a moment. Hail to you, Babylon, great mother of all, who drinks the blood and watches the gate, who stands across the abyss. You give breath and body and sense of self. And you break it in turn. Mystery of mysteries. Thank you for your presence tonight, Holy One, and the gifts that you might give us. As you slowly show us your ways. Thank you, Master Aya. That is not an energy I'm used to. Not a bad thing.
No, but definitely a feeling of holy terror.
Yeah.
So welcome, folks. Welcome. So tonight, both in honor of our guest and because we haven't done one in a while, we're going to be doing all non-alcoholic cocktails and drinks tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep, I am a week away. I am less than a week away from ending my yearly detox, where I go without caffeine and alcohol because I have a health condition, so I need to take a break once in a while. But on Sunday, my kindness to myself will be done.
there's some relief there, I think.
It's not even the alcohol. Like, I can go without alcohol and I will live. And sometimes I miss it, like I miss candy. But like caffeine is something I am like emotionally attached to. Like, even though I know I am no longer chemically dependent on caffeine because I haven't had a drop of it in like 40 days, I'm just like, I smell coffee. And it's like when someone is accidentally wearing your ex-girlfriend's perfume and it's been less than a year since you broke up. And you're like, don't do it. Don't start reminiscing. You'll only hurt yourself. And then you do it anyway.
Yep. I know that feeling. It's chemical dependency and psychological dependency are very different things. And they go hand in hand sometimes, but not always. Hello, everyone who's joined us. We've got a couple people in the chat. Josie, Kimberly, Kat Blackwell, and Melody's here.
Hi, everybody.
Indeed.
Oh, that's cool.
So while we're still getting started, what is everyone drinking tonight for our non-alcoholic episode? I'll go first.
I was going to say, you're the one actually having the drink.
That's fair. So I did it. I think it's vaguely based on a Paloma, but I did basically about 2 ounces of apple cider vinegar. Ended up doctoring it because it was a little strong. So probably about 3 ounces of simple syrup, about 2 ounces of lime juice. Top off with grapefruit soda. I used Fresca, and then a couple of Luxardo cherries because it's fancy and why not? It's actually really good. It's pretty vanilla-y, which is interesting, but I think that's the cider vinegar coming out.
So me, I've got what amounts to a Shirley Temple. The only thing I don't have on me, so a lot of these mixed drinks have grenadine in them. I don't have grenadine, so I'm just going without. This is basically ginger ale and Luxardo cherries, because like a lot of the mixed drinks that I found I could put together in a decent amount of time were going to be really simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for folks playing at home, the reason it's clear is because I'm using Zevia. So this is Zevia ginger ale. It'll taste a little bit different, but it's got that sweetness. But the I'm using Luxardo cherries as well. So for all those playing at home, these are incredibly sweet.
They're very sweet. How about yourself, Cabra? What are you treating yourself to?
I'm having herbal tea because I live with an herbalist and the apothecary is well stashed. So today's blend is roasted barley tea that I got from a local Japanese food mart, and roses, but like just enough to barely get the scent of them, with a little bit of honey. And I have this much.
Very nice.
So I'm set for the rest of the evening.
Very nice. Okay, Kimberly is Cat Lady. There we go.
Cool. Okay.
Cool. Also, nice. Elf Skinner, who is Melody, says, "Go, go, magic goat."
Here's hoping.
So, Cabra, for those who aren't as familiar with you and what you do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. I am a reclaiming witch and Thelemite who specializes in folk Catholicism and grimoire magic. So I'm break down all 4 of those piece by piece. Reclaiming witchcraft is an ecstatic witchcraft tradition that started in the 1970s in California by a bunch of ecofeminists. It's a deeply political, very leftist tradition. It has gotten a little less lefty as time goes by, but like just by a hair. I would definitely recommend people go to see the Principles of Unity if you're interested. I will say that our community is always trying to grow towards our ideals, which means we don't always reach them, but we're working on it. And I really deeply appreciate the group effort that Reclaiming has in all of its different groups to like all the local collectives to like really try and get this down. Thelema is a sort of philosophy / spiritual practice that was popularized by Aleister Crowley in his writing of something called the Book of the Law. And it centers around this concept of your thelema, which is like a fancy word that loosely translates to the word will in English. Basically, it is about finding what you are supposed to be doing in life and then kind of focusing in on that. And it's kind of an article of faith for Thelemites that when you find your will, when you're doing your will, you're not going to impede anyone else's will. You should be pretty happy with the thing you are doing. And it should kind of be the path of least resistance. Like these are little tips and tricks that you're like actually doing your will, right? Not that it's always easy, just that, you know, if you start doing the thing that is you being the best you can be, the universe should kind of lay off a little, right? Or at least make it possible for you to continue doing that. And then the folk Catholicism and grimoire magic come in because Reclaiming and Thelema are both very much about like method and community. They're not so much a collection of entities to relate to. And where the folk Catholicism and the grimoire magic come in is that grimoire magic is not really complete on its own. You have to have sort of a cosmology to go with it because there's so many cosmologies that can run through those books of operative magic. And so folk Catholicism is what my ancestors would have practiced, except that instead of being a Catholic in the traditional sense, I think the papacy should be abolished, but I love the Virgin Mary. And I spend a lot of time figuring out how to hold those two things that seem completely contradictory. And then grimoires are pretty much that. It's just a bunch of books about how to talk to angels and demons, and they live in the overlap between pre-Christian Mediterranean paganism and Islam and Judaism and Christianity. So it's just a big giant collection of fun books that you're not supposed to read, which are my favorite kind of books. So that's me. I'm a book person.
That is both the most thorough and complicated guest explanation I think we've had to date, which is absolutely a compliment.
Thank you. So.
Well, I guess the question is what does witchcraft mean to you?
Witchcraft is so I think of witchcraft as being in a Punnett square. I'm sorry, every one of my answers is going to be super complicated.
Do it. That's awesome. Like,
okay. I think of witchcraft as being in a Punnett square where like the first axis is like licit versus illicit. And the second axis is accessible to poor people and inaccessible to poor people. Right. And witchcraft lives in the square of being accessible to poor people and also illicit. Right. It's not that every single thing every witch ever does involves drinking the blood of your enemies and poisoning your bosses with herbs. Just that to me, a witch should not write that off as an emergency possible action. Right. So the other three squares to me, if it's accessible to poor people, but you refuse to break cultural taboos because you think those are important, that's cunning craft in English. If it is inaccessible to poor people and you do not like to break taboos, that makes you a magician. And if it is inaccessible to poor people and you will consider breaking taboos, that makes you a sorcerer. And as the years go by and I find myself turning into a fancy person, I seem to be moving more from witch to sorcerer, which is fine with me because the witches still like having me around. And I didn't forget how to do things that way. I'm not against it. Like, one of the best spells I've ever seen anyone do involved taking a toy car from the dollar store, wrapping it up in some bubble wrap, and sticking it in the driver's side door as a way of keeping the driver safe while driving around. It worked. If I didn't have access to all of my fancy people things, that's what my magic would look like. So
Yeah, no, that sure shit would work.
apparently it did. The person who used that protective spell apparently got into a horrible crash and the car was totaled, but the driver was fine.
Nice.
Yeah.
The car can be replaced. You cannot replace the driver.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And yeah. What's the other Crowley quote? Not that I particularly like quoting him, but let success be thy proof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a paraphrase from the Book of the Law.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Random aside.
Mm-hmm.
The drink I had in the middle where I had orange juice in it was a sunshine, basically. Just a couple of cherries and some orange juice and a little bit of a splash of ginger ale.
Mm-hmm.
This is Roy something or another.
Roy Rogers.
That's it. Roy Rogers. And basically all it is Coke and cherries. Like I said, like the on the lazy trade because these mixed drinks are dead simple.
You know?
But the reason they're clear is because Zevia doesn't do
Artificial coloring stuff.
artificial coloring, so it's all clear, which totally fucks with Maleck's head. I love it.
It does. Every time I see it, I'm like, what are you drinking? Oh, right. You don't do the sugar thing. That's right. Yeah. Also, random aside, as I was doing a bit of like background research for the prayer for the show, I was reading stuff and I was like, oh, I cannot stand Crowley.
I will say that there are many valid criticisms one can have of St. Alistair, and I do judge people based on what their criticisms are. Like, if you come up to me and you're like, Crowley did a racism or a misogyny, I'm like, he did do that, and I can understand why you would have issue. But if you come up and you're just like, Crowley worshiped the devil and he was gay, I'm like, all right, you can go over there. Go over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I hope the universe hits you gently when the 2x4 comes around, but it is a coming.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it was the misogyny for me. But
yeah. And the thing about it is that his misogyny is the kind where it's veiled in putting women up on a pedestal. But then when you see the way he actually treats women in his life, which I'm currently getting the gruesome play-by-play of because I'm reading Père de Rabot, which is like the definitive biography of Crowley. Like, it's just like he's just in it to hit it and quit it. That's his whole motto. And if he would just be honest that was his whole MO, the world would be a better place.
I mean,
go.
There was the whole thing of like him searching for his own prophesied muse type deal.
Oh, the Scarlet Woman thing. Okay,
Yeah.
So hold on. We have to slow it down so that everyone can appreciate what a drama llama St. Alistair is. I say this as someone who is also overly dramatic, right? Like, I love drama.
Mm-hmm.
You have come to the right place.
Right. So one of the things that was told to Crowley by the spirits that he worked with was that he was going to receive a woman into his life who was supposed to be the embodiment of Babylon, and that she would be his Scarlet Woman. There were several Scarlet Women, as it turns out, throughout Crowley's lifetime, and he set a precedent within the, like, what I'll loosely call the occultist community of finding women that you are dating temporarily, assigning them this deep spiritual meaning in your life, and then with various amounts of their consent and knowledge of what is going on, like including them in your magic workings, right? Now, if you happen to be dating another occultist, and that occultist, regardless of their gender, is like, I'm going to be the Scarlet Woman in this relationship, and then you consensually do some like sex magic together, that's great. That's beautiful. We need more of that in the world. But I have definitively seen male occultists who cannot understand the concept that women can also do complicated math magic stuff like they do, being like, oh no, she's just my Scarlet Woman. She's just the scryer. It's not that takes training or skill or anything. Right?
I feel scummy.
Yeah.
I will. Again, there are some Scarlet Women relationships where everything is above board, and that's fine. So I don't try not to judge people when I first meet them. But I have also heard stories.
Yeah. Like you were saying with the Punnett Square, like, I'm certainly not above doing illicit social taboo breaking things. Like, whatever, that's fine. If I'm involving someone in my magic, like, no, they gotta know. Informed consent is the cornerstone of healthy relationships.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between breaking cultural taboo to break cultural taboo, and breaking cultural taboo because you want to kind of sail by your own inner morality, right? Or that you see the way in which like the world around you could grow, culturally speaking.
I think there's also something to be said of the difference between consent with somebody that you're entering to a spiritual relationship with versus I'm going to use magic on you because you're a dick. I don't need to consent at that point. You're fucked. You should be lawful prey at that point.
Yeah, no, I have definitively had a situation in my life where I felt it was necessary and well advised to do Bane work against someone, and I hope to never need to do it again. But if I have to, I will wreck someone else's life. So,
yeah.
Love you, Car.
Because it's extra gay today. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and just because we had some conversation in the chat, I thought this was especially funny.
That is neat.
Literally turns his head and looks at the TV every time I talk. That's pretty awesome for a frog.
Neat.
The frog has good taste. Llamas for the win, Cabra. The other one I wanted to show was... oh God, where was it? It was fucking funny. The bit about Crowley getting kicked down the stairs.
Oh.
Ah, there it is.
Yep.
Oh, of course it was.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Yeats.
Again, for people not in the know, Yeats and Crowley had a lifelong hatred of each other. It was one of those things where they were like just similar enough that it increased their hatred for each other on the subjects where they disagreed.
Yeah. And at some point, Crowley was kicked down a set of stairs by Yeats. And yeah.
I don't think I've gotten to that part yet, or I forgot it under the veritable mountain of detail in this biography. One or the other.
At least that's what I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm certainly not a scholar in the subject, and I could be wrong, but that's my understanding, is that at one point in some kind of like Crowley was trying to initiate some kind of hyper dramatic magical duel with the leader of whatever group Yeats was in, went over to the thing while they were meeting and got kicked down the stairs.
Oh no, then that might not have happened, but they did have a lot of words because we definitely ran through that part already. So another great Aleister Crowley is definitely the bad guy in this particular situation story. So I don't know if you know this about Masonic orders, but they are like punk genres in that they are incredibly sectarian, right? Like a Masonic order will form if there's a group of 10 people and 3 of them get into disagreeing about the leader. They will just go form their own whole Masonic order and claim and act like there's 500 people in it and that it's been a thing for 1,000 years. No, it is literally just 3 dudes with enough money to rent a place and make business cards, right? Like
a lot of modern pagan temples and organizations. Understood.
We are true to form. It's tradition. Anyway, so what happened was the Golden Dawn started in London with the head of that particular branch of the order being a guy by the name of Mathers. Someone wrote a song about it on TikTok. You can't say that and not link it somewhere. Come on.
If you can find it, Melody, please link us.
Right.
Please and thank you. I have the hardest time looking for TikTok songs. But back to Crowley. So Mathers is power hungry and does not know how to be power hungry in a way that's particularly clever or well versed. So he makes a bunch of like Saturday morning cartoon villain level mistakes. And like I have more respect for people who try to be power hungry, who at least understand how to play that game properly and what the rules are, than people who are going to be Saturday morning cartoon villains about it. So Mathers, for various reasons, leaves London and basically permanently moves to Paris, but he doesn't know the move is permanent at time, which leaves the Golden Dawn in a limbo where he has an acting head, three people in council as the acting head of the order, while he's in Paris, and they're just kind of sitting there like, at what point has Mathers been in Paris long enough that we can functionally not wait for him to send us messages to make big decisions, and we're just going to have to do things? And this goes on and on and on and on, and it's like a little teensy tiny time bomb waiting for a disagreement between Mathers and the 3 council members to have a disagreement about. And then along comes Aleister Crowley. So
Aleister fucking Crowley.
Imagine playing that TikTok sound the entire time. Am I the drama? That's the sound that Crowley is making this entire story, right? So he comes up and he's like, I want to join the Golden Dawn. I'm really into Kabbalah, and it's really cool to meet people who are also into Kabbalah. And they're like, yeah, cool. Here you go. Here's a bunch of study materials. And he's like, I know all this already. I studied this while I was climbing mountains in like 3 different countries. Like, I have this memorized. And they're like, well, then just wait until the probationary period. Oh, God. My cat, 1 second.
You're good.
We make time for our kitties.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Mother Multiverse just sent me the song.
Oh, good.
So if anybody wants to see this legendary TikTok, I'm posting it in the chat right now.
Very nice.
My deepest gratitude. I'm very excited for this. Oh,
good luck figuring that one out.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you see a small tuxedo, that's my cat. Anyway, so Crowley comes up and he's like, I already know all of this. And he's technically not supposed to be doing magic before he's like passed all his tests and his waiting periods and blah, 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 blah. But he doesn't care because he's Crowley and he's better than everybody. And why should he have to follow the rules? So he starts finding a guy by the name of Alan Bennett, who was already way past the way into the order in the we actually permit you to do magic now phase. He was also had a million health problems, which comes up later. So Alan Bennett turns to Crowley and is like, you've been fiddling with the Goetia, haven't you? And Crowley, not wanting to out himself as having broken any rules in front of a bunch of other members of the Golden Dawn, is like, no. And Bennett is like, then the Goetia has been fiddling with you. Anyway, long story short, they start doing Goetia together in based on Mather's translation, weirdly enough, in Crowley's apartments. And then at some point, Crowley is like, hey, can I please go? I did all the stuff. I passed all the tests. I memorized the dead languages. I know the Kabbalah. Can I please join the part of the order where you do magic now? And then everybody was like, you are a womanizing, bisexual drama queen. No, you cannot. disbarred. You're going to stay in like study buddy kindergarten for the rest of your life, as far as we're concerned. And Crowley went to Mathers and was like, Dad, Mom won't let me play with the Xbox, even though I already played with the Xbox. So I don't see what the big deal is. And Mathers was like, of course you can play Xbox, and initiates him in Paris into the now you get to do big boy magic now phase. Right?
Crowley is so fucking petty. He leaves and goes to France to get initiated because fuck you. Here's the end run around game.
So then that becomes the thing that becomes the power struggle, is that Mathers is like, I initiated Crowley, and the council is like, we refuse to or accept this as a fact. Have you met him? And Mathers is like, absolutely. Crowley is a man who respects me and blows hot air up my butt. And we are both members of the British People Commodifying Scottish Heritage Club. So there, right? Hi. So, I mean, you better not do this if I ever get onto a podcast with people who don't already know and like me. Anyway.
You've got a cat, though. I mean, you really do have an in.
Yeah.
Be okay.
It's like, if you interview me, you get to meet this guy.
Baby.
He is a baby. He's being a trouble baby. Anyway, speaking of trouble babies, back to Crowley and Mathers. So Mathers. So they send a bunch of angry letters back and forth where they keep trying to pull rank with like weird white people passive aggressive messaging, right? Of like
that's always a plus.
According to the on the document of the and the bylaws, you know, and eventually they come to a standstill where no one can like out rules lawyer the other. And at this point, Mathers sends Crowley to the Golden Dawn headquarters in London to try and establish order. So Crowley's plan is to hire a very intimidating looking man to stand behind him in a dark, empty room while he's wearing a black cloak and a mask that's like a goat's head mask or something, with one dramatic interrogation light falling down upon a table holding a piece of paper. And
are you fucking real?
His plan was to bring in one person at a time and intimidate them into swearing an oath of fealty to Mathers, so that by the time he went to the triumvirate, like the 3 people council thing, they would already have to recognize Mathers as the head of the order because everybody individually had signed it. He was basically going to prisoner's dilemma every single person in the Golden Dawn in London. This backfired because the 3 people council heard about this, and the unofficial head of the 3 people council, a lady, came by and was like, what are you doing? And Crowley's like, I just came by to get the stuff for the order since you're being shut down. And she was like, we're not being shut down. This stuff belongs to us. Mathers has abandoned us for years, and I still don't recognize you as having the right to walk into this room. Get out. And then they got into such a screaming match that someone called the landlord. And the landlord was so above wanting to deal with this that it went to court. And court decided that since the lady that was the unofficial head of the order was the one who was paying rent, she was the one who had access to the space and who owned everything in it. So then Crowley had to go back to Mathers' his tail between his legs. And that is the story of how Yates and Crowley, in the middle of all of this, are constantly cursing and counter-cursing each other and sending back insults and all of that mess.
So anytime that folks want to bitch about how TikTok are a bunch of play acting shits, well, I'm sorry, but this is also tradition.
It's tradition. It's actually like, it's a fun part of the tradition if you're outside the blast radius. When you're in the blast radius, it sucks.
Yeah.
So when it comes to decolonizing and kind of looking at how our paganisms have evolved, I find that these stories are really illuminative because these are long-term trends that the pagan community communities really goes through. And I don't care whether it's the TikTok heathen talk or the TikTok witch talk Tumblr before it, AOL chat rooms, BBS boards back when the primitive internet went, It doesn't matter. This shit is literally as older than we are.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like, there's a couple of things that play into it, right? And one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to do one of my long explanations again. I'm not going to call it decolonizing the practice, because if you read the paper, Decolonizing is not a metaphor, which is a great paper, by the way. If you can stand to read dry material for 14 to 20 pages, it's definitely worth a read. I will find a copy for y'all later. I think it's important to distinguish between decolonizing, which is things like land back and restore the commons, which are actively trying to make physical changes in reality, and the kind of cultural shifts that we're talking about, which I've been loosely thinking of as like unlearning, right? Like we're unlearning colonizer mindsets, unlearning colonialism, right?
So in heathen, you might call this putting down our Christian baggage.
That also works. Let's go with that. I think I've also heard some of the ex-fundies, when they escape Christianity, or they escape at least like toxic fundamentalist Christianity, deconstruction. And I think that if no one minds me using that word, I'm happy to use that for the process. But it's amazing how much of deconstruction is learning the history. So people are constantly making claims like witches didn't actually worship the devil, or like thinking like
oh, here it is. Thank you, Josie. I will post that link in the comments.
There we go. Thank you.
That's it. It's a great paper. But yeah, a lot of it's learning the history. So like learning that the concept of whiteness is constructed somewhere after 1500, maybe 1700s. I don't know, the timeline's a little wobbly. It's definitely after 1500, right? So yeah, the earliest I would say is 1600s. I'm quibbling about numbers. But it's also about understanding that when we have this concept of like a culture, an ethnicity, a race, trying to put like a wall around these cultural concepts doesn't seem to work, because at the edges, they're all very fuzzy and intermingled. What we can actually do instead is define epicenters, and understand that defining these epicenters and naming them epicenters of a particular culture is not a neutral act. It's an active act of making history, of mythologization in many ways, especially when you get into nationalist myths that do the same thing, where we're like, yeah, America is about freedom. And it's like, well, what do you mean with that statement? And then people talk about the cultural epicenters of American nationalism, of like, well, the Declaration of Independence and Mount Rushmore. And you're like,
usually immediately jump into from there is capitalism and cheerleading for that. And if you don't mind, I think one of the things that is really key to consider, both when we talk about decolonization and when we talk about dropping the baggage or deconstruction, I think it's important to look at the ways that these intersect in our lives, but also when you say looking at the history, this particular point in history is really important. Around the 1500s is when the enclosures hit, is when the nascent beginnings of industrialization start to occur. Because by this point, the slave trade has begun, and in earnest. Oh, that was the cutest little meow.
Are you going to get up here or no?
No, because you won't.
But I think it's really important for folks, for a historical context. Part of the reason people cheerlead so hard, hand in glove, capitalism equals freedom, is, at least for white people, that meant social mobility, and that meant freedom of a kind. And I think that also is important to note, because the definition of whiteness had to expand the more capital that they wanted to accumulate from white people, at the disadvantage of everybody else on the outside of those fuzzy edges.
Yeah.
And this can somewhat be a shock to people when they start learning just how whiteness is constructed.
Yeah, I mean, I know that critical race theory is like a pop buzzword, and people don't seem to. I have an understanding of it that's much different from the way it gets talked about. But my understanding of critical race theory is that it begins with the idea, which I'm like 98% certain, which is as certain as I can be about this topic, that like race begins to be constructed in the law, because the way that the law treats white people, black people, indigenous people, etc., is different. So critical race theory begins with the idea that if the law creates race, then the law must be crucial in our understanding of race today.
Yeah.
So, and that's the way that it was introduced to me when I bought like a introduction to critical race theory for book nerds 101. Like,
yeah, I think the important thing that a lot of folks don't know is that it started as a theory specifically in law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of the verbiage and a lot of the understanding of this comes out of.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not involved in, I think that when you break it down like that, it's really easy to understand. And I think that its place has been completely overblown. Thank you, right-wing news.
Right.
Because you need to constantly produce an enemy. But I think that in a very funny twist, I think that the right has kind of screwed itself, because now people actually are starting to really understand what critical race theory is, what it says, and why it says it. And to a certain degree, this popularization is pushing whiteness even harder than if they had just kept their damn mouths shut.
Yeah, the thing that they should have done, not that they should have done any of this, but if you were actually trying to be a Saturday morning cartoon villain, what you should have done is picked an outdated version of deconstructions of the history of race in America and made that your boogeyman, right? Because like critical race theory is actually like not a bad place to start deconstructing and understanding the concept of race and racialization, right?
Yeah,
right.
It's like if you're trying to make feminism the boogeyman, you don't want to get into like the complicatedness of the overlap between queer theory and women's studies and fourth wave feminism. You want to go back to really outdated and deeply unpopular feminists like Andrea Dworkin and her like anti-porn feminism.
Jesus Christ.
And her
Dworkin,
like
I
weird
forgot she
quirky
existed.
tendencies. And you want to bring
Cabra.
her up. You want to bring up Betty Friedan, because then what you're going to have is you're going to do the thing the right does the best, which is split the left into lefties who are so obsessed with arguing against the right that they cannot see their nose on their own face, and lefties who are trying to slow the train down, overcorrect, and then also forget to have nuance because they're too busy being like, well, we can't do that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, here's hoping that everybody learns some actual critical race theory and some actual history, and that we all really get used to talking about this stuff. But bringing it back to like spiritual practices, right, and deconstructing in our practices, I think that it is an inescapable truth that we're all affected by Christianity in all of this, and that to deconstruct even our paganism, why are we looking for pre-Christian practices? You know, what does it mean to be pre-Christian? What all did we take up from Christianity, and specifically from the Christianity of the rich, right? Are there leftist Christianities? These are all questions that I think even non-Christians have to ask themselves, because it's the water we swim in.
Right. And I think a really quick and easy, dirty answer for that is just check out the Jesuits and liberation theory in the Catholic Church.
The fact that the Jesuits are into the leftism now confuses me so badly, because they were originally, when the Pope started going around stealing everybody's crap, right? And like holding people at metaphorical and literal gunpoint to convert to Catholicism, they were the people who wrote all of the Pope's excuses for the papacy. They were just like, well, it's okay to do this because you can think about it like this. And they invented an entire new form of arguing just to justify like various things like loans for businesses, Christians being able to charge interest, right?
Because that was illegal at the time.
Right.
Well,
That's a, yeah.
Just for a real quick bit of history, Ignatius of Loyola and 6 companions formed the Societas Jesu under Pope Paul III. And they were an evangelical and apostolic ministry in 112 nations. And in the intervening years since the 1500s, they have basically turned themselves into the premier leftist Catholic bloc, basically. And it's been really funny if you look at their history.
It's weird. It's weird. And then you have liberation theology that has things that are so antithetical to like everything the papacy seems to stand for. That's like,
no shit.
It's not that the church advocates for the poor. It's that the church arises up out of the poor. It is a spiritual concept, not an institution. And it's like, oh, you don't say, right? And it's like, we must clearly create, in order to immanentize the eschaton, we must create a world in which the kingdom of God is present, in that we treat each other nicely and according to the actual teachings of Jesus, instead of trying to convert everyone to Catholicism by force if necessary. And it's like, that's a 180.
Yeah, it's pretty stark.
Scoosh, just a scoosh.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the when we talk about decolonizing, that's one thing. We talk about putting down the baggage or deconstruction, that's another. The other thing is, how do we repaganize out of a past with all of that in front of it? And that for me is where a lot of this conversation gets really interesting, especially in the heathen circles that I'm in, because that's where people deeply disagree on the place of things like folklore, folk practice. This is where folk Catholicism and heathenry intersect with trolldommer and other forms of practice that have survived in different shades. The Arslag, like the year walk, to go Arskanger, that is to take a year walk outside, talking to no one, to gain. You do this like 9 years in a row, and the runes will come to you and give you power. It's one of the ways that you can initiate yourself into working with the runes.
It sounds like what people do when they walk the entire Appalachian Trail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Sometimes you have to build the church out of the poor, put a few orphans in those supports. So funny you mentioned that.
I think it might be too soon for this joke.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention that. That was actually a practice in the Catholic Church. Yeah. Where you would have, they do it in cemeteries too. The old folk practices that I just like, that would be one of them. They used to hole up people in their walls. If you take a look, x-ray a couple of old Catholic churches, you will find people in them.
Yep.
Yeah, and like Kai said, it protects the building. Yeah, that's because they're the spirit of the building.
Yeah. As much as I could sit here and dunk on the papacy all day, because we literally could dunk on the papacy for 3 hours.
All day. Yeah.
But this
people in glass houses, right?
Well, no, this is actually what I was going to tie it into. Like,
oh, okay.
Again, like this is a pagan thing too, because in the Scandinavian countries that I'm familiar with, this was also a thing. Now, you also would see substitution, like not even substitutions, but you'd see in the Threshold, for instance, Lakuto talks about this in, I believe, Demons and Spirits of the Land, and also in the tradition of household spirits, especially, where the snake or the cat or whatever animal is going to be the guardian of the home, or be the god of the home, if you will, is buried underneath the threshold and or the hearth. So, sacrifice and beings of place is a very, very, very old concept. How do we repaganize that? Well, clearly we're not going to put fucking kids in the walls, but there's nothing saying we can't do if actual sacrifice squicks you out, or it's just not the thing that you want to do. Substitutionary sacrifice is an ancient thing too.
Yep.
You don't have to kill a snake and put it in your threshold. You could, I would probably do a terracotta or wood snake, but you can take a snake, cut it up, and put it underneath your threshold.
Yep. I mean, also, we do have animals that we bury in our yards, right?
All
When
the time.
beloved family pets die, where do you bury them? In the yard. There's no reason why, Spot the dog, who was so loving and protective of you in life, would not be willing to continue to protect you in death, especially if you continue to tell him he's the goodest boy and give him treats.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I think that I'm all for shortcuts to modernization, to like, not modernization in the worry of like, we will industrialize this and make it profitable, but like making things accessible for contemporary humans with our like current our current resources.
I'm sorry, I just had this horrible thought of like what an industrialization of spirit guardians for the house would look like.
I mean, we already like murder animals en masse all the time.
Yeah, I'm just imagining the horrible like infomercial at 3 a.m. Like, do you want a guardian for your house? Just send us 3 payments of $19.95. Call now, and you'll also get a threshold guardian for the back door.
Yeah, I don't know.
Ow.
Right. So I
Where
guess
were we?
Sarenth was either about to spill the beans on how repaganization and unlearning colonialism go hand in hand,
Yes.
or I was going to start asking questions about manifestations of colonial mindset in paganism today.
I think these all kind of interplay with one another because you have to be willing to deconstruct your mindset in order to approach things in as clean a headspace as you can, in order to repaganize where you can.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just some practices that you can't separate from the Catholic Church. It's kind of a wasted effort. And if you've got that much of a beef with the Catholic Church, just don't worry about X or Y practice. That being said, there's going to be, like in my case, there are certain ancestors that will never talk to me because I'm pagan. Because I'm a heathen. I am the thing that they've been warned about their whole existence. So that's fine. I'm not going to honor these ancestors, but I'm also not going to let their baggage stop me. Simultaneously, that doesn't mean that I have to like willy-nilly excommunicate my own ancestors from my pool of ancestors that are useful and good, just because we happen to have a disagreement about ontology. And I think this is where a lot of pagans, a lot of heathens get caught up, is especially when they're first converting, they are often running away with good reason from Christianity in one way or another, and either fall into the trap of Christianizing their paganism on entry, which happens a lot with Odin being turned into a Christ figure and Loki being turned into a Satan figure, or on the other hand, it's all bullshit, everything's made up. These gods aren't real, they're just metaphors for natural phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Which I have also seen, and I get the impetus, but it kind of makes my teeth itch.
Yeah.
And I think that there is not really a happy medium, but there's some necessary healing after you put the baggage down that has to occur. So you approach things in a fresh light. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a recovering Catholic, approaching folk Catholic practices right off the bat is probably not going to be ideal if you've left the church. Yeah. Likewise, go ahead.
So what strikes me is a lot of what I see with that kind of thing is folks defining their religion by what it's not, by how it's not Christian, right? I'm not a Catholic, I'm doing this other thing, but it's all defined in opposition to, which is very similar to how whiteness is constructed, right? Because whiteness is effectively defined by all the things that it is not. This isn't super my area of expertise, but that's kind of a rough summary of it. Like, you can define whiteness best by the things that it isn't, which is all the cultures around it. And that's not a healthy way to exist or to be as a person, right? Like, because then you're not a thing, you're just a bunch of things that you aren't. And so you can't define what it is you're actually doing. You're just defining all the things you're not doing.
Right. And speaking as someone who did this, right? Like I was a person who had a really hard time finding an identity. And if you imagine a white pagan bingo card, I have hit every single box on the white pagan bingo card on my way here, right? But it's just like, it's not an identity. It is forced on you in place of an identity, but it's not an identity. It is a card to a fancy privilege club that doesn't help everybody equally. Like poor whites and rich whites have access to like different kinds of whiteness. And it's just like, yep, nope, that thought went right out the window. Sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
It's an active football in a lot of arenas, because I'll take an example from somebody that I talked with at work. Well, I grew up white and poor and da 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 da. Well, okay, but the reason you were poor wasn't because you were white. Like,
yeah.
And trying to get people who've never questioned race through that first gate and then form their identity after that can be a real challenge, because up to this point, they're playing with a deck assuming that everybody's got access to the same cards, and it's not the case.
And the big problem for pagans specifically is that you have people who jump the boat from one kind of white extremism to a different kind of white extremism, right? Who go from the I don't see color liberal denial about the realities of race to being, pardon my phrasing, race realists. Like, and that's how you get the white ethno-nationalists and the Nova Roma fash who are trying to create an identity for themselves out of this like weird pastiche of a previous culture. And they tend to be bad at their history, right? With like ignoring large parts of it.
You kind of have to be.
Right. Yeah. But that doesn't stop them from doing it. And it's just kind of an interesting question of like, how do we create communities and patterns of communities where people come in and we sit down and we have a conversation called, you've got a lot to unpack here. Here's some things you should know. Because I made all these mistakes. I want to keep other people from doing the same thing. Like, someone please learn from all of the stupid things I did in my 20s. Please.
So I think part of the issue we're running up against is specific to paganism, because you have divisions within it that are at complete loggerheads with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take it to the approach of theistic versus non-theistic witchcraft, what do they actually have in common? And I'm not meaning that as a put down. These are real ontological realities that are lived, that if these two people can't talk to each other, they can't form community. Mm-hmm. So this is a bugbear problem within heathenry, because we have people who insist with their full chest that I can be an atheist heathen. And most of the heathenry is like, nah, that doesn't scan in the least. Like, you can come to our rituals, but that doesn't make sense because our identity is actually based in reciprocity with gods. Now, however that shakes out for you in terms of what the particulars of the theology are kind of beside the point, but like the minimum barrier to entry to adopt the heathen identity is you have to believe in these gods, not as mere thought forms or something.
Yeah, because at that point, if what you're doing is taking on the rituals without holding the belief, what you're actually doing is trying to adopt like a pre-Christian Scandinavian culture as a cultural identity, not a spiritual identity.
Yeah, I actually think the problem's in reverse.
Really?
I think the problem's in reverse, because what they're doing is maybe not in reverse. Let me put it this way. The problem is that witchcraft is a subculture and is treated and organized as a subculture, not as a culture. But I think partly because witchcraft is contingent on other cultures for its information and execution. So there's witchcraft forms within heathenry.
Mm-hmm.
We have Seidr, we have Spa, we have Fjokingi, yada, yada, yada. I could go on that all night. But these are codified and expressed in heathen ways.
Mm-hmm.
So witchcraft within a heathen context takes certain flavors and forms. When it's atheist witchcraft, I'm not an atheist witch, so I don't know, but you lose that cultural context, or you are appropriating it away from a culture that is trying to construct itself. So in regards to heathenry, like if somebody comes to me and says, I'm an atheist witch and I do Seidr, I'm going to go, how?
Who are you talking to?
Yeah.
Right. So
if you want to be an atheist and still do like trance work, you can come join the Thelemites. There's a bunch of modernist Jungian, it's all in your head, you have no idea how big your head is types over in my camp. You then have to deal with deconstructing a lot of Orientalism and anti-Semitism that's going on in the history of the practice.
right.
But you're going to have to, especially if you're white like us, you're going to have to deconstruct something.
Right. So the point that I'm trying to make is that not only do you have to deconstruct whiteness as the qualifier and the signifier, you also have to construct. And that's where I think a lot of paganism slips when it comes to taking down the baggage and building something else up, because they're not building anything up as an identity. Because it's one thing to deconstruct, but if all you're doing is breaking your fucking toys, you're never going to be able to play.
Oh, so it's the problem of finding those cultural epicenters like I was talking about earlier. So for example, like I consider myself Iberian diaspora twice removed. And for me, a cultural epicenter of being Iberian is the language. I still speak Portuguese. I speak a dialect of Portuguese, but I speak Portuguese, and the olive. And the way that I usually tell the story for myself as this cultural epicenter of Iberianness for myself is through the story of a dish called farofa, right? So Brazil has a dish called farofa. It is manioc flour, cassava root flour, which is indigenous to Brazil, prepared using West African cooking techniques. And then you add to it for additional flavor, right? Olives, onions, very Iberian things, especially the olives. The olives are very Portuguese, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's the first displacement. And then the second displacement is when you come to America. For a really long time, we couldn't get cassava root flour. Like there was no Bezos. There wasn't as much international shipping. It was far more expensive and rare. So we had to make farofa out of cream of wheat.
Ooh.
And so my Iberianness is that I am the olive sitting in this pile of cream of wheat next to an onion. And that to me is Iberian diaspora twice removed. But because of the language and the recipes, I have a story of how I got here. I have a continuation. I have something I can build up because I have this epicenter of what it means to be Iberian, which is my family's been eating olives since before we had recorded history of our family.
So I get, okay, so something kind of in my gut right about here kind of shifted as you were talking about foods from your ancestry that have survived in your family. I don't have that.
Yeah.
Your average white guy in this country, their family forcibly discarded their previous identity to whiteness, and they don't have anything. And that was something that really kind of hit me when I started deconstructing whiteness in my own family. Was like, okay, well, where did we come from? Well, one of the big stories that I've told on this show and others is how my great-grandfather came over from the Netherlands during World War I. And then he lost the language, and he never on any of the stories or recipes or anything. Even that little bit of your story, I feel some jealousy towards it. Deep in my gut. I just ate dinner, but whatever. I feel it in my gut though, because like you can put your history, your family in your mouth.
Yes.
I have to go find other people's families' Bavarian recipes or Dutch recipes to kind of approximate.
But I think if your grandpa's from the Netherlands, you and I actually share a cultural ingredient. Salted cod, bacalhau.
Ooh,
There is this thing that happens. I think it's the Netherlands. Don't quote me on that. Nope. I'm confusing the Netherlands and Norway.
Okay, I was going to say, I was like, I don't know, but
never mind.
It's okay. No, but I do have some Scandinavian heritage, but not a lot.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, though. Like with constructing identity, where do I pull from? Are my teeth French? Are my hands German? Is my beard Dutch? I mean, that maybe a little bit. I'm kind of poking fun at my own whiteness, but like this is where a lot of the extreme in heathenry gets caught up. Is they cling really hard to white as an identity, even though it offers them nothing and takes everything, because it offers them temporary privileges at the cost of everything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We literally, over the course of many generations, have sold our souls through the doing of nearly unspeakable atrocities, right? Like my great-great-grandpappy probably like back far enough invented the Middle Passage. Like being Portuguese mostly is a hard reckoning, because every single time you read the history, the first group of people to en masse kidnap people by force from the coast of West Africa, that was my ancestors. We should have stayed home, but we didn't.
Yeah. I mean, even in the possibility that my Dutch ancestors stayed their asses to home and were peasants, they still benefited from the Dutch slave trade.
Yeah.
Their commensurate costs of living, their commensurate pay, everything that made their life what it was changed dramatically because of the slave trade.
Yeah.
Whether or not they were like, and this is again where whiteness gets caught up in the details. Like, you put down your whiteness and pick up your ancestry, and you suddenly have to deal with some uncomfortable questions of, even if my ancestors never directly benefited from slavery, themselves were never slave masters, did they benefit from this? Abso-fucking-lutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is a very uncomfortable feeling. And rather than deal with that discomfort and abolish whiteness in themselves, before we even get to repaganizing, because if you don't do this step, you get romanticization.
Yep.
If you don't do this step of putting down the whiteness and picking up your ancestry, you get Nazis.
Yeah.
Because then you get the ancestry with the whiteness, and it's just worse.
Ugly.
Yeah. My ancestors, we had a lot of really cute stories. We were these cute little boat riding merchants. We went all over the place. We went to Hawaii, and we were like, we have a cavaquinho, and Hawaii was like, hold my beer, and invented the ukulele. And we went to Japan, and we were like, we deep fry things in oil, and Japan was like, hold my beer, and invented tempura, right? And then we went to someplace in West Africa, and we're like, we make a soup out of ham and kale, and they said, hold my beer, and apparently made a legendary delicious dish, which I still have not been able to find, but I'm on the hunt for it. So we could have been those guys. We were this close to just being the cute little merchant traders that went all over the place. And then we were like, we have an idea. And then someone was like, hold my beer, I have a better idea. I'm
going to take your idea and you can get the fuck on.
And then we decided that the answer to having just recreated a national identity after a really hard and very morally gray time of like dealing with like the fallout of the Islamic Caliphate on the Iberian Peninsula was to do that to other people, like only worse.
So Russell Means, I think it was, the AIM activist, the American Indian Movement activist, said, no, it was Russell Trudeau, excuse me, who talked about how the only reason that the tribes of Europe could do what they did to other people was because they drank the poison that they gave to other people first.
No.
Yep.
And that, I think, is also because having literally done trance work and work with my ancestors on this, there is a chasm where you can see that wound. Where if you're spiritually inclined to do this, and I don't recommend this for newcomers, do your ancestor work with ancestors that are good for you. Boilerplate disclaimer, please don't just go out and do shit. But there's a chasm between your ancestors who gave up their identity and became white. There is a chasm and there is pain there. And a lot of people, rather than confronting that and looking it in the face, will set that aside and say, that's too painful. I can't do that. And then keep drinking the poison like it's going to make them better.
Yeah.
And there's some part of me that wishes I could just set up shop as a bring me your last name and I will find where it's from. And that's going to be enough for you to get started. And we'll give you some food to like start nourishing your soul from where your name is from. And like, it's not that easy. It's not that simple, right?
It isn't, but it's a start. And that's a lot more than a lot of people have starting out. Like, I've seen so many heathens roll through who are like, I don't know what my cultural identity is. I'm just some white American dude. Here's my name. I don't know what else to do with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, start somewhere.
And the one thing that I think we all have as white Americans, and myself included, even though I am literally like I literally was born in Brazil, right? Is that I speak English with no accent. That means that British culture, right? All the way back to the so-called Anglo-Saxons or the English or whatever, the Angles, however we're calling them today. Like, I get that now. Especially because that's a colonizer culture that's currently like continuing to do colonization. Like America is actively colonizing across the globe in new ways that are difficult to name and understand. So for me, it's open season now. Like, and I think Alaric Albertson was the one who introduced me to this concept. And then it kind of started to sink in more and more as I got older that like, if you speak English, even if it's your second language, you speak English because America is doing an imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to go fuss with like the Knights of the Round Table, you know, images of the Holy Grail, you know, like the Anglo-Saxon Younger Futhork runes, if that calls to you and that's where you want to start, go for it. You also can study the food culture of Britain and how World War II completely demolished it. And see what it was like pre-World War II.
Yeah, that in and of itself is really eye-opening because like these are like watching the BBC Farm series and having them go through different periods in history and just seeing how stark a contrast between the monastery farms previous to the separation of the Catholic Church from the Church of England and then into the World War II. There's no comparison. I mean, just the density of the food they were eating, like the bread alone, just tells its story.
I have not seen this series.
It's amazing. I will link it to you.
Yeah, someone link it to me later. I want to say, I mean, I know that I'm going to cry because I am, in my heart of hearts, a vegetable farmer. It is the thing that brings me the most joy in this world, second only to like reading long old books. But that sounds like a thing that has to be reckoned with because I speak English. So British culture is a culture I've assimilated into, whether I like it or not. So, yeah. The other thing that's really funny about deconstructing whiteness that I think is also useful to this problem of like moving through the discomfort, not avoiding the discomfort, moving through the discomfort and grieving process to find something that isn't white nationalism on the other side. Is this concept of like starting to understand that whiteness changes over space and time. Whiteness in Brazil is not the same as whiteness in America. And whiteness in America has in like 1776 was not the same as whiteness in America in 2022. Right?
Yeah, like Germans weren't white at one point. The Irish were not white.
Irish. Yeah.
I have seen, you know, those really, really horrible phrenology, pseudoscience things proving race is real by the size of somebody's skull. Apparently the Irish and the Iberians and the Italians all got put into the same group together at some point, and I don't understand how. Like, I can kind of see Northern Iberia and like the Celtic parts of the Isles because we do have like a Paleolithic shared history and genes can go back that far. But that's a stretch.
Yeah. And there's like Celt-Iberian overlap there. But still, yeah, no, you're 100% right. Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I do want to mention, because it's a real danger and it's something that I in particular struggle with a lot, is the white guilt concept.
Yeah.
It's a really easy hole to fall into, where, because you're faced with, as you're doing this deconstruction, you're faced with this very real and very important pain that you're dealing with, right? Like, and letting that kind of consume you, where you feel you place your emotional pain over doing the work, which will actually solve the pain, right? Because the point isn't to feel guilty. The point isn't to bear the sins of our ancestors. It's to start fixing shit now. Right?
I love that. So I'm going to do a yes and, if that's cool.
Yeah, please.
One thing that I have heard a lot of people of color, especially Black bread tubers, bring up is this question of like, why are you interested in, you know, like unlearning whiteness and unlearning colonialism and unlearning, you know, toxic masculinity? And I know for me, like, my horse in this race is that I'm very interested in like 3 different social movements. There's a lot of really great social movements. These are just my personal favorites. It's like labor movement, gay power movement, excuse me. And then what was the third one? I forget. Those are my 2 favorites, I guess. And the thing that has been the downfall of both of these movements, time and time and time again, is race baiting. Right? Over and over and over again, they will break up worker strikes by having the scabs that they bring in be specifically a different racial and ethnic background than the people who are striking. So you create that problem by refusing to hire Black people for a really long time. And then suddenly when you need scabs, Black people are welcome. And when Black people come in, they in very logical fashion are like, well, I have no reason to join this union in protesting, because when I was unable to get hired, they didn't care about me, and they were actually glad they didn't have to compete with me for this job. So it's vital that if we're trying to get gay rights, if we're trying to get workers' unions to really become a thing again, we have to understand that it is not optional whether or not we center BIPOC concerns in these unions from day one, because you want to make it clear that you have rolled out the red carpet and put out the welcome mat and said our BIPOC, you know, fellow workers and what have you are like the people we have to focus on first, so that we can all get free. Because then when the strike happens, you're going to have a lot of people that you've invested into relationships with who are like, oh no, I do have something to gain by standing with the union. Because if I was a person where the union was like, we don't want you, and the employer was like, we don't want you, and then suddenly I get hired to be a scab, I would scab. I'm not above scabbing for that particular reason. So that's my horse in this race. And it makes it a lot easier to deal with the white guilt, because I can sit down and be like, well, hold on. Feel your feelings in private. Totally valid, but then you have work to do. So think about something you can do, right?
Yeah.
There's a gentleman that I follow on TikTok, and of course I can't remember his damn name right now, who's excellent. And he talks about there being a big difference between book allies versus accomplices. Book allies are the kinds of folks who read Ibrahim's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Ibrahim X. Oh God, I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names. Anyway, they read the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that's where they stop. Either they stop after they read the book, or they say the right things, but what their actual effect is null and fucking void. And getting white folks to get past the initial gut check of that really hurt my feelings is something they need to do away from BIPOC spaces. But because it gets to this point where it's almost like white guilt's a fucking indulgence. And I mean that both in the classic Catholicism term and in terms of you're just indulging your feelings in front of everybody because you want to be comforted as opposed to doing your fucking work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fucking problem, especially in white activist spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Like, your feelings, if they don't have a material impact, are a fucking indulgence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, take your anger and your frustration and make something useful out of it, or get the fuck on and get out of the way.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with being like, listen, that was a lot of news to take in. I'm going to take 5 minutes, make myself a cup of tea, do some regulation, and then I will come back and be ready to go back to this meeting properly. There's a big difference between that and pulling like a white ally, but I helped you. How dare you call me a racist, right? I live in perpetual fear of being that guy. Oh, we lost Sarenth.
We lost Sarenth.
Sarenth apparently needed 5 minutes to go feel his feelings and make some tea.
Which is legit. And he is back. Hold on.
Yeah. Living
There we
in that
go.
concern is legit. That was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. Internet.
Yeah.
cut for a second.
And I think one of the things that we talked about, because one of the things I like about Reclaiming is that, you know, our BIPOC like fellows were like, hey, these are things you need to work on. Here's a list. And we took the list and we were like, we should start a path about it. So I took a path on like beginning to deconstruct whiteness. And one of the things that we were talking about, or at least one of the things I took away from the class, is that you are always going to be making a mistake, but it is better to make the mistakes and learn and build a relationship where people can give you criticism, not cuss you out, not abuse you, criticize you, to be like, hey, it wasn't cool when you did this, please stop, if we're going to get anywhere. And and I have seen it happen. I have lived through this moment. It has happened to me where a person of color has tried to give me like very well-intentioned and gentle criticism. And you can literally feel in your spine, or at least I felt in my spine, your whole body lose its mind. And it's just like, why?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, because I think part of it is that white folks are somewhat literally in their bones afraid of being done to them what was done to people of other colors.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of what we're seeing out of the right wing right now is a lot of fucking projection, and a lot of that is based in fear.
Yeah. Not to stop the conversation, because this is a conversation we could have for literally days. But we are coming up on an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to get us towards wrapping up with what are two things that people at home, people listening at home can do to one thing to deconstruct and one thing to rebuild.
I think one thing that would be very helpful in the heathen communities is put down good and evil as a concept. Because the notion that I see passed around a lot in heathen circles is that the Jotnar or the Ettins or whatever are just evil. As opposed to, there are some forces out there that are opposed to our interests, and sometimes we have to do things to protect ourselves because of that. I think that dispensing with good and evil as concepts of morality in heathenry and applying them to other beings is a problem. And it leads to a lot of unnecessary baggage because of where that morality comes out of. And then to build up, I think taking one of the gods that you would normally feel squicked out about or concerned about, and seeing what after you take that label down and put it aside, what developing a relationship with the god feels like. Simple things, offering of water to start with, maybe some bread, because if we can do this deconstruction and reconstruction with gods, we can do it with anything.
That's good.
I think the difficulty for me is that my practice very much revolves around Catholicism. So I don't know if I want to start about like folk Catholics and pagans. Like, is that topical?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. One thing to put down is this idea that folk Catholicism and the folk Catholicism cannot exist without the papacy, that the institution justifies the practice, that the dogma of the institution justifies the practice. And we need to pick up the idea that community wellness justifies the practice. If the practice causes the community to thrive, that is enough for it to be valid.
That's good. Shit, I had... Damn it. All the things that I was thinking are gone. Damn brains. Mine is kind of 2 in 1 because you have to do both for it to be effective. And it was stuff that I hit on earlier in the conversation. The thing that I would like folks at home to do is to, in order to deconstruct, along with all the other things you have to do, is stop thinking, or at least practice stop thinking of yourself in opposition to the other, whatever the other is that you are running from, right? Whatever the thing that you are deconstructing is. Catholicism, evangelical Christianity, right? Whatever. And ask yourself the honest question, without that, what am I building? Right? What is it that I want to do with my practice? And answering that question in positive terms, not like love and light, but rather like, these are the things I want to do, rather than negatives, which is, well, I don't want to do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think my brain is having a hard time connecting the dots. Can you explain it another way?
Yeah. So to use an example, I was raised Lutheran, so a lot of my deconstruction is deconstructing the things that I was taught in the Lutheran Church. So instead of defining myself as I am no longer Lutheran or I am no longer Christian, putting that down entirely, starting from a place not of I am not that, but from a completely neutral place of I am, and then asking the question, okay, what do I want to do? What do I want to be? And answering that question not in, well, I don't want to be white, I don't want to be racist, I don't want to be Christian. What do I want to be? I want to be a good neighbor. I want to be a positive force for people who need it. Or I want to be in good community with the gods and spirits who are around me. Right, like Josie says, something you are, not something you are not.
So positive identity.
Yes, positive identity versus negative identity. In the literal mathematical sense, as in you are adding something, not subtracting something.
And I think, if you don't mind me doing a yes and for that, it's important to realize that when you say I am something, you are accepting it warts and all. When I say I'm a Thelemite, I do so understanding that we have an Orientalism problem. We have a huge Orientalism problem that we have not even begun to reconcile with, though they are finally starting to form a committee about it, which is about, 50 years too late, but it is what it is. We didn't have the resources. And so I accept, warts and all, that when I call Aleister Crowley St. Aleister, I am applying the term saint to a man who did a bunch of racism and who did a bunch of misogyny and who did a bunch of Orientalism. But that is what I am.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've been talking this whole broadcast about the white supremacy issue within heathenry, and we have to look at all of these things bald-faced without bullshit. And in accepting the heathen identifier as a positive identifier, we also have to root out the white supremacy in our midst.
Mm-hmm.
That's just when you pick up that particular football, that's the game you're playing.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. All right. So I think that's a good note to end on, as long as y'all are fine with that. And for those who want to, we will be on the Discord for at least a little while. See y'all in the after party. And thank you for being here. Thank you so much, Cabra, for being here. And we will see you all next time.
Yeah, it's been an honor. Thank you all for your ears and eyes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, y'all.